David had always been the guy who kept to himself at work, not because he was unfriendly or rude, but because he learned the hard way that mixing feelings with professional life could get messy real quick. 2 years ago, his world got turned upside down when his long-term relationship ended badly. Since then, he made a simple rule for himself: keep work at work, and keep his heart locked away where it couldn't get hurt again. He worked as a graphic designer at a small advertising company. Downtown, it wasn't the biggest place, but it was comfortable. Everyone knew everyone, and David liked it that way. He had his routine down perfectly. Come in at 9, grab his coffee, sit at his desk in the corner, and focus on creating designs until 5 o'clock. Sometimes he'd chat about weekend plans or complain about the weather. But that was about it. No deep conversations, no personal stories, and definitely no getting emotionally involved with anyone. That comfortable routine got shaken up on a Tuesday morning in March, when the boss introduced their new content writer. Her name was Lisa, and from the moment she walked into the office, David knew his carefully built walls were going to be tested. Lisa wasn't just pretty, though she definitely was. She had this warm energy that seemed to light up whatever room she entered. During her first team meeting, she listened to everyone's ideas with genuine interest, asked thoughtful questions, and even laughed at their manager's terrible jokes in a way that didn't seem fake at all. When someone spilled coffee all over the conference table, she was the first person to jump up with napkins, making jokes to ease the embarrassment. David watched all of this from his usual spot in the back corner of the meeting room, and he felt something stirring in his chest that he definitely didn't want to feel. It was attraction, sure, but it was more than that. There was something about her kindness, her authenticity, that called to a part of him he'd been trying to ignore for 2 years. After the meeting, as everyone filed out, Lisa stopped by his desk. "Hey, you're David, right? The designer?" she asked with a genuine smile. "I saw some of your work on the company website. That campaign for the local restaurant chain was really creative." David felt his face warm up. "Thanks," he managed to say, keeping his voice neutral. "Just doing my job." If Lisa noticed his somewhat cold response, she didn't show it. "Well, I'm looking forward to working with you on some projects. I think we could create some really cool stuff together." As she walked away, David made a mental note to himself: be professional, be polite, but keep your distance. This was exactly the kind of situation he'd promised himself he'd avoid. Over the next few weeks, David perfected what he thought was the art of friendly detachment. When Lisa would bring homemade cookies to share with the office every Friday, he'd take one and say thanks, but then quickly return to his computer. When she'd ask him about his weekend plans, he'd give short, general answers that didn't invite follow-up questions. During creative meetings, he'd contribute his ideas professionally but avoided the casual banter that Lisa seemed to enjoy. With everyone else, the problem was, the more David tried to stay distant, the more he found himself noticing everything about Lisa. He noticed that she always arrived exactly 15 minutes early and used those minutes to organize her desk and review her notes for the day. He noticed that she hummed quietly while she worked, usually old pop songs from the 90s. He noticed that she kept a small succulent plant on her desk and talked to it sometimes when she thought no one was looking. He also noticed that she was incredibly good at her job. Her writing was sharp and creative, and she had this ability to take his visual designs and find the perfect words to complement them. Even though David was trying to keep things strictly professional, he couldn't help but feel excited about their collaborative projects. They worked well together, almost too well, but David was determined to stick to his plan. Every time he felt himself wanting to linger at her desk, after dropping off design files, he forced himself to walk away quickly. Every time she made a joke that genuinely made him laugh, he reminded himself to keep his response measured. Every time he caught himself staring at her during meetings, he'd immediately find something urgent on his phone to look at instead. His friend Tom from the IT department started noticing these weird patterns. "Dude, what's your deal with the new writer?" Tom asked one day during lunch. You act like she's got some contagious disease or something. David almost choked on his sandwich. What? No, I don't. We're just co-workers. I'm professional with everyone. Tom raised an eyebrow. Professional is one thing, man. But you literally change direction when you see her coming down the hallway. And yesterday I saw you take the long way to the printer just to avoid walking past her desk. David felt exposed. He hadn't realized his avoidance tactics were so obvious to other people. I just like to keep work and personal stuff separate, he said defensively. Look, I get it, Tom said, his voice gentler. After what happened with your ex, you're being careful. But Lisa seems like good people. Maybe you don't have to build a fortress around yourself. That conversation stuck with David more than he wanted to admit. Was he being too extreme? Was his fear of getting hurt again making him miss out on potentially good connections? Even just friendship. But every time he considered letting his guard down a little, he remembered the pain from 2 years ago, the arguments, the betrayal, the months of feeling like he couldn't trust his own judgment about people. It had taken him so long to feel stable again, and he wasn't ready to risk that stability for anyone, no matter how kind or genuine they seemed. So David continued his careful dance of professional politeness and emotional distance, not realizing that sometimes the harder you try to hide something, the more visible it becomes to the people who are really paying attention. And Lisa, despite his best efforts, was definitely paying attention. David thought he was doing a great job hiding his feelings, but the truth was starting to leak out in ways he didn't even realize. It's funny how the heart has its own language, and sometimes that language speaks louder than words ever could. It started with small things, tiny cracks in the wall he'd built around himself. During Monday morning team meetings, David would unconsciously lean forward in his chair whenever Lisa spoke. While everyone else might be checking their phones or doodling on their notepads, David found himself hanging on her every word. When she presented her ideas for new campaigns, he'd nod along more enthusiastically than he did for anyone else, completely forgetting his rule about staying neutral and detached. One morning, Lisa mentioned to the office that the coffee machine was acting up again. I think it's finally giving up on us, she said with a laugh, holding up a cup of what looked more like brown water than actual coffee. David just nodded politely like everyone else, but that evening, he found himself staying late to figure out what was wrong with that machine. He spent almost an hour watching YouTube videos on coffee machine repair, then carefully cleaned all the parts and adjusted the settings. The next morning, he arrived early and made a test cup perfect. When Lisa tried to make her usual morning coffee and got a proper rich brew instead of the weak stuff from the day before, her face lit up with surprise and delight. Oh wow, someone fixed it, she announced to the office. This is actually good coffee now. David kept his eyes glued to his computer screen, pretending to be deeply focused on a design project. But inside, he felt a warm satisfaction that he tried his best to ignore. He told himself he would have done the same thing for anyone in the office. It was just being a good coworker, nothing more. But the small gestures kept happening. When Lisa's computer started running slowly, David happened to walk by her desk during lunch when no one was around. He spent his entire lunch break running virus scans and clearing up her hard drive. The next day, when her computer was running like new, she looked around the office with curiosity. But David was already buried in his work, acting like he had no idea what might have happened. Tom started picking up on these patterns faster than David realized. Dude, you're like a ninja helper or something, Tom said one afternoon when they were alone in the break room. Lisa's computer problems mysteriously disappear. The coffee machine magically fixes itself right after she complains about it. What's next? Are you going to start doing her grocery shopping? David felt his face turn red. I don't know what you're talking about. I help everyone around here when I can, right? Tom said with a knowing grin. Remember last month when my printer was broken for 3 days? You told me to call IT. But Lisa mentions one computer glitch and suddenly you're the office tech support guy. The conversation made David uncomfortable because Tom was right. David was going out of his way for Lisa in ways he'd never done for anyone else in the office. But he convinced himself that it didn't mean anything. He was just being nice. That's what good people do, right? The real problem was that David's feelings were starting to show in bigger ways too. He'd developed this habit of timing his trips to the printer or the supply closet so that he'd pass by Lisa's desk. He never stopped to chat, but he'd slow down just a little, hoping to catch a glimpse of what she was working on or maybe overhear her humming those old songs she liked. Sometimes Lisa would look up right as he was walking by, and their eyes would meet for just a second. David would immediately look away and pick up his pace, but not before he noticed the little smile she'd give him. It was a warm, knowing kind of smile that made his stomach do weird flips. Lisa had also started paying more attention to these little interactions. She began to notice that David always seemed to know things about her routine that she'd never directly told him. When she mentioned being hungry during a long afternoon meeting, David would somehow have an extra granola bar on his desk the next day, positioned where she couldn't miss it when she walked by. When she complained about her neck hurting from looking at her computer screen, someone had mysteriously adjusted her monitor to the perfect height overnight. David's really thoughtful, isn't he? Lisa mentioned to Amy from accounting one day during their coffee break. Amy looked confused. David, he's nice enough, but I wouldn't call him particularly thoughtful. Why? Oh, just little things, Lisa said, but she didn't elaborate. She was starting to piece together a pattern that David thought he was hiding so well. The breakthrough moment came on a Thursday afternoon when Lisa was struggling with a particularly difficult project. She'd been staring at her computer screen for hours, trying to find the right words for a campaign that just wasn't coming together. David had been watching her from across the office, noticing how she kept rubbing her temples and sighing in frustration. Without thinking, he got up and walked over to her desk. You okay? He asked, his voice softer than his usual professional tone. Lisa looked up at him with tired eyes. Just stuck on this project. The client wants something creative, but every idea I come up with feels boring. David hesitated for a moment, then pulled up a chair next to her desk. Mind if I take a look? Sometimes a fresh perspective helps. For the next 20 minutes, they worked together, bouncing ideas back and forth. David found himself completely forgetting about his rules regarding emotional distance. Lisa was creative and funny, and working with her felt natural and easy. When they finally cracked the concept that had been eluding her, Lisa turned to him with genuine gratitude. Thank you so much, David. You really saved me there. As their eyes met, David realized he'd been leaning closer to her during their brainstorming session. They were sitting close enough that he could smell her perfume, something light and floral that made him want to stay right where he was. But then his internal alarm bells started going off. He was getting too close, too comfortable, too attached. This was exactly what he promised himself he wouldn't do. No problem, he said, quickly standing up and backing away from her desk. Just part of being a team. As he walked back to his own desk, David could feel Lisa's eyes following him, and he had the uncomfortable feeling that his carefully constructed facade was starting to crumble, piece by piece. The moment that changed everything happened during the most stressful week of the year. At their company, it was annual review time, which meant everyone was scrambling to finish their biggest projects and present them to the management team. The office buzzed with nervous energy, and everyone was working longer hours than usual. Lisa had been assigned the most important presentation of her career so far. A major client was considering renewing their contract, and her presentation could make or break the deal. David could see the pressure getting to her. Every day that week, she stayed later and later, her desk covered with crumpled papers, empty coffee cups, and notebooks filled with crossed-out ideas. By Thursday evening, most of the office had already gone home. David was packing up his things when he noticed Lisa still hunched over her computer, her hair falling into her face as she typed frantically. She looked exhausted and stressed, and something inside David's chest tightened with concern. He tried to ignore it. This wasn't his problem. Lisa was a capable professional who could handle her own challenges. He had his own projects to worry about, but as he walked toward the elevator, he couldn't shake the image of her sitting there alone. Looking so overwhelmed, David found himself stopping at the elevator doors, his finger hovering over the button. He stood there for a full minute, having an internal debate with himself. His rational mind told him to go home, stick to his boundaries, and let Lisa figure things out on her own. But his heart was pulling him back toward her desk. Without fully deciding to do it, David turned around and walked back into the office. He grabbed a fresh cup of coffee from the machine he'd fixed weeks earlier and approached Lisa's desk quietly. "Hey," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Thought you might need this." Lisa looked up from her computer screen, blinking in surprise. Her eyes were red and tired, and David could see she'd been fighting frustration for hours. When she saw the coffee in his hands, her expression softened. "David, I thought everyone had gone home already. I was about to leave, but I noticed you were still here." He set the coffee down next to her keyboard. "This presentation is really important to you, isn't it?" Lisa let out a long sigh and rubbed her eyes. "It's huge. If I mess this up, it could really hurt my reputation here. I've been working on it all week, but nothing feels right. Everything I write sounds boring or generic." David found himself pulling up a chair without asking permission for the first time in months. His concern for Lisa overpowered his need to maintain emotional distance. "Can I take a look? Maybe a fresh set of eyes would help." Lisa hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'm desperate at this point. I'll take any help I can get." As David leaned in to read her draft, he became acutely aware of how close they were sitting. He could smell her shampoo and feel the warmth radiating from her body. His carefully constructed walls were crumbling, but for once, he didn't pull away. They worked together for the next hour, and David was amazed by how naturally they collaborated. Lisa's writing was actually brilliant, but she'd been overthinking everything. David helped her see which ideas were strongest and suggested ways to present them more confidently. When Lisa got excited about a new direction for the presentation, her whole face lit up, and David felt his heart skip a beat. "Oh, my gosh, yes," Lisa exclaimed when they cracked a particularly tricky section. "That's exactly what I was trying to say, but I couldn't find the right words." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with excitement and gratitude. They were sitting so close that David could see the little gold flecks in her brown eyes. The office was quiet around them, lit only by their computer screens and the city lights streaming through the windows. "David," Lisa said quietly, her voice different than he'd ever heard it before. "Why are you helping me like this?" The question hung in the air between them. David felt his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. All of his careful planning, all of his rules about keeping his distance, everything he'd built to protect himself was dissolving in this moment. He could have given her a safe answer. He could have said something about teamwork or company loyalty. But sitting there in the quiet office, seeing the genuine curiosity and warmth in her eyes, David found himself telling the truth instead. "Because I care about you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "More than I should. Probably. I've been trying not to, but I can't help it." The words escaped before he could stop them, and as soon as they were out, David felt a mix of terror and relief. After months of hiding his feelings, he finally said them out loud. Lisa's expression didn't change right away. She studied his face carefully, as if she was seeing him clearly for the first time. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle. "I know," she said simply. David blinked in confusion. "You know," Lisa smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "David, I've known for weeks, maybe months, but how? I thought I was being so careful to keep things professional." Lisa laughed softly, not in a mocking way, but with genuine warmth. "You fixed the coffee machine the day after I complained about it. You mysteriously solved all my computer problems. You always seem to have extra snacks when I mention being hungry. And you get this look on your face when you think I'm not paying attention." David felt his face burning with embarrassment. "What kind of look?" "Like you're trying really hard not to care, but you can't help yourself." Lisa reached out and touched his hand gently. "David, Your actions have been saying everything your words haven't. In that moment, David realized that all of his careful strategies had been pointless. While he'd been trying so hard to hide his feelings, Lisa had been reading them clearly all along. The wall he built to protect himself had been transparent to the one person he most wanted to hide from, but instead of feeling exposed and vulnerable, David felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope, because Lisa wasn't pulling away or making excuses to leave. She was sitting there with him, her hand still touching his, waiting to see what he would say next. David stared at Lisa in complete shock. She had known all along. All those months of carefully planned conversations, all his efforts to seem disinterested, all the times he'd taken the long way around the office to avoid her desk, none of it had worked. "You've known for months?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. He felt like someone had just told him that everyone could see through his clothes. The embarrassment was overwhelming. Lisa squeezed his hand gently, and the simple touch sent electricity up his arm. "David, you're not as mysterious as you think you are. Remember that time I mentioned my car wouldn't start, and the next morning someone had left jumper cables on my windshield with a note that just said for emergencies? Your handwriting was on the supply room clipboard right above where you signed out those exact cables." David closed his eyes and groaned. "You saw that? And the time I said I was worried about my presentation skills. And suddenly there was a public speaking book on my desk with helpful passages highlighted. I asked around the office, and Amy told me she saw you at the bookstore during lunch that same day." Each example Lisa mentioned made David sink deeper into his chair. He had thought he was being so sneaky, so careful, but apparently he'd been about as subtle as a neon sign. "I'm mortified," David said, covering his face with his free hand. "You must think I'm some kind of creepy stalker or something." Lisa laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine, not mocking at all. "David, look at me." Reluctantly, David lifted his head and met her eyes. "What I think," Lisa said carefully, "is that you're one of the kindest, most thoughtful people I've ever met. Do you know how rare it is to find someone who pays attention to what others need without expecting anything in return?" "But I was being dishonest," David protested. "I was pretending I didn't have feelings when I obviously did. I was lying to you every day." Lisa shook her head. "You weren't lying, David. You were scared. There's a difference." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "Can I tell you something? I was scared too." David's eyebrows shot up. "You were scared of what?" "Of you," Lisa said simply. "Well, not of you exactly, but of what I was starting to feel for you. Here's this guy who goes out of his way to make my life easier, who notices when I'm struggling and finds ways to help without making a big deal about it. Who wouldn't fall for someone like that?" David felt his heart stop beating for a moment. Fall for someone like that? Lisa's cheeks turned pink, but she didn't look away. "David, why do you think I kept finding excuses to walk past your desk? Why do you think I always seemed to need help with things right when you were around? I was hoping you'd eventually trust me enough to tell me how you felt." "You mean you were doing the same thing I was doing?" "Pretty much, yeah, except I think I was better at it than you were." Lisa grinned. "I never left evidence lying around." David couldn't help but laugh. Here he'd been, thinking he was protecting both of them by keeping his feelings hidden, when Lisa had been hoping all along that he'd open up to her. They'd both been dancing around the same feelings for months. "So what happens now?" David asked. "I mean, we work together. Things could get complicated." Lisa nodded seriously. "They could. Dating a coworker isn't always easy. There are rules we need to follow, people we need to tell. And if things didn't work out," she trailed off, "if things didn't work out, we'd still have to see each other every day." David finished. It was the fear that had been keeping him awake at night. "For months, exactly. So I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." David's stomach tightened. "Okay, is this just attraction, or is this something deeper?" Lisa's voice was steady, but David could see the vulnerability in her eyes. "Because I'm not interested in some casual thing that's going to make work awkward when it's over. I've seen too many office relationships crash and burn." David took a deep breath. This was it, the moment where he could either retreat back to safety or step fully into the unknown. Looking at Lisa, seeing the hope and fear mixed together. In her expression, he realized there was really only one choice he could make. It's deeper. He said quietly, "I've been fighting these feelings for months because they scared me. I don't just think you're attractive, Lisa. I admire your work ethic, your creativity, the way you treat everyone in the office with kindness. I love that you hum while you work and that you talk to your plant when you think no one's listening. I love that you bring cookies every Friday not because you have to, but because you want to make people happy." Lisa's eyes were getting watery, but she was smiling. "I was terrified to tell you any of this because I knew that once I did, there would be no going back to the way things were. But sitting here now, I realize I don't want to go back. I want to see where this could go, even if it's scary." Lisa was quiet for a long moment, and David held his breath waiting for her response. Finally, she spoke. "I want to see where this goes to, but we need to be smart about it. We should tell our manager, follow whatever policies the company has. About relationships, take things slow and see how it feels to be together outside of work." David nodded eagerly. "Whatever you think is best. I can't believe you felt the same way this whole time." Lisa stood up and started gathering her things from her desk. "Come on," she said. "It's almost 10 o'clock. Let's get out of here and go get some real dinner. I think we have a lot more to talk about." As they walked toward the elevator together, David felt lighter than he had in years. All that energy he'd been spending on hiding his feelings was suddenly free to be used for something much better, actually building something real with the person he cared about most. 6 months later, David was sitting at his desk on a Friday afternoon, watching Lisa laugh at something their coworker Ben had said during a team meeting. The sound of her laughter still made his heart skip a beat, but now he didn't have to pretend. It didn't affect him. Now he could smile openly and know that she understood exactly what that smile meant. The past 6 months had been a journey neither of them could have predicted. After that night in the office when they'd finally been honest with each other, they moved slowly and carefully. Their first real date had been awkward and wonderful at the same time. They'd gone to a small restaurant downtown, and David had been so nervous he accidentally ordered the same thing Lisa did without even looking at the menu. "Are you copying me already?" Lisa had teased, and they both laughed until the tension melted away. Dating a coworker had come with challenges they'd had to learn to navigate together. They'd sat down with their manager the week after their first date and explained the situation. To their surprise, she'd been supportive but clear about expectations. No public displays of affection at work. No letting their relationship affect their professional judgment, and absolutely no drama. If things didn't work out, "We've actually been waiting for you two to figure this out," their manager had said with a knowing smile. "The whole office has been taking bets on when you'd finally tell each other how you felt." David had been mortified to learn that their feelings had been obvious to literally everyone except themselves. Tom had collected $20 from the office pool for correctly guessing that David would make the first move during a work crisis. But the real adjustment had been learning to balance their personal and professional lives. In the beginning, David had worried constantly about how their relationship might affect their work. Would people think Lisa was getting special treatment because she was dating him? Would their collaborative projects be seen as unfair advantages? Those fears had mostly proven unfounded. If anything, dating Lisa had made David a better employee. He was happier, more creative, and more willing to collaborate with everyone on the team. Lisa had helped him come out of his shell professionally, encouraging him to share his ideas more openly and take on bigger challenges. There had been difficult moments too. Early in their relationship, they'd had their first real fight about a work project. David had disagreed with Lisa's approach to a campaign, and she felt like he was dismissing her ideas. They both let their emotions from work spill over into their personal time, and it had taken them a few days to figure out how to separate their professional disagreements from their romantic relationship. "We need rules," Lisa had said after they'd finally talked through the argument. "When we're at work, we're co-workers first. We can disagree professionally without it meaning anything about how we feel about each other personally. They developed a system of small signals to help them navigate the tricky balance. A quick smile across the office meant "I love you, even though I think your idea for this project is terrible." A gentle touch on the shoulder during a meeting meant "I've got your back, even if I can't show it right now." The best part, though, was discovering all the things about Lisa that David's careful observation from a distance had never revealed. He learned that she was terrible at parallel parking and would drive around for 20 minutes, looking for a spot she could pull straight into. He discovered that she collected vintage postcards and had shoeboxes full of them from flea markets and antique stores. David found out that Lisa was incredibly competitive about board games and had once refused to speak to her brother for a week after he'd beaten her at Monopoly. She learned that David had taught himself to play guitar during college, but was too shy to play in front of anyone, and she'd slowly convince him to play for her on quiet Sunday mornings. They'd developed their own routines and traditions. Every Friday, instead of Lisa bringing cookies for the whole office, she'd bring them for everyone but save the best ones for David, wrapped in a little paper bag with a silly drawing on it. David had started leaving small notes in Lisa's desk drawer, not the anonymous helpful gestures of before, but signed messages that said things like "Hope your presentation goes well today. I'm proud of you." Their friends and family had been mostly supportive, though David's mother had expressed some concern about dating someone from work. "What if it doesn't work out?" she'd asked during a family dinner. "Won't that make things awkward?" David had looked at Lisa, who was helping his younger sister with her homework at the kitchen table, completely at ease with his family despite only having met them a few times. "Mom, I think some things are worth the risk." Now, sitting at his desk 6 months later, David reflected on how much his life had changed. The fear that had controlled him for so long, the fear of being hurt, of being vulnerable, of taking emotional risks, hadn't completely disappeared, but it no longer ran his life. Lisa caught him staring and raised an eyebrow with a playful smile. She mouthed "What?" across the office, and David just shrugged and went back to his computer, grinning. That evening, as they walked out of the office together, Lisa slipped her hand into his. It was such a simple gesture, but it still amazed David sometimes that he was allowed to hold her hand, that she wanted him to. "What are you thinking about?" Lisa asked as they waited for the elevator. "Just how different everything is now," David said. "6 months ago, I was terrified you'd find out how I felt about you. Now I can't imagine hiding anything from you." Lisa squeezed his hand. "You know what I learned from all this?" "What?" "Sometimes the things we're most afraid of losing are exactly the things we need to risk everything to gain." As they stepped into the elevator together, David realized that the story of trying to hide his feelings had become the story of learning to trust love itself, and that was a much better story than the one he'd been trying to write alone.